It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, September 4th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high-quality content that is trying to become a Danny Briere whisperer.
This is getting harder.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our weekly poll is still going, so make sure to get your voice heard on what you think the viewpoint is on the Flyers in the national media, mostly on the broadcast. And if you think the Flyers have like the right number of national TV games relative to where they fall in the NHL these days. The rookie showcase is happening today. Russ is in DC for that, and we're going to report on that as soon as the activities come to a conclusion. We did a whole episode previewing it and why Matvei Michkov and Ivan Fedotov are going to be there. And that episode was a week ago, Monday, on August 26th. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes for you so you can get right to it. We are going to get to comments made by Danny Briere about first-round draft pick Jelt Luchanko, cause a little bit of controversy. That'll be our next segment, but we want to touch on the biggest news of the day yesterday in the NHL, which was that Leon Draisaitl signed an 8-year contract extension with Edmonton that has a $14 million cap hit. And, he's a year away from his current contract being expired. So similar to Travis Konechny in the sense of, getting it done a year early in the summer. Not similar in terms of the cap hit. That is for sure. So what was your take on the deal for Draisaitl?
My take was it's more than I thought they were going to offer him because now they have to pay McDavid more. So that's one thing. It's a high percentage to the cap of the cap. I don't know, Evan Bouchard, like how you fitting him in the future. I mean, maybe they know something we don't about how much the cap's going to go up the next few years, they're hoping. Then my mind goes to like, hey, gee, the Flyers are saying they're picking a year to kind of wait on free agency. And I don't know if they don't have a true number one defenseman at that point or a true number one center at that point, can you even go in free agency and get one anymore?
Yeah, like what will their cap hit end up being at that point? And I think they could get somebody that's very good, that's not as, quite as expensive as Draisaitl or McDavid. I think, that's for sure. But
you couldn't get a top 15 guy in the league as a number one defenseman. That's definite.
Yeah, so I think that it would be in the bottom half of number one defensemen in the league. That is for sure. If you go from team to team and look at their top defensemen, it's going to be in the bottom half of the league if they get it through free agency.
Right.
100% agree with that. I think it is interesting that Draisaitl signed this deal now relative to the McDavid negotiations, because I think that, we've seen kind of guys work with each other to try and get the best deal for both of them in order to move the team forward.
Right.
But this very clearly, to me anyway, seems like Draisaitl is like, no, I'm going to get my own bank. McDavid, you're on your own. This is not a group negotiation.
No, this isn't like, hey, let's both get the same number. No.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even expecting the same
No,
number.
but
I was
sometimes
just thinking,
teams have done that in different
yeah,
sports. Guys have gone in and say, all right, look, for the good of the team, we'll take the same number and this will give them extra money to spend. There's not going to be any extra money to spend.
no, or some sort of like team friendly discount. And
Right.
I feel like McDavid already gave the Oilers a
He
team
did.
friendly discount in his current deal. Those days are going to be over
Yeah.
for sure, because there's no way that Draisaitl is going to end up making more than him. Now he will for one season because of the way the contracts go, but in terms of expiration. But this is a really interesting development, not just because of it sets the bar for superstars in this league at a certain level, but I do think it also kind of sets the bar for if a team wants to continue to be successful.
Yeah, I mean,
Making it to the final, how do they stay there?
right. I mean, this is why building through the draft is important. It's never 100%. You can't build 100% of your team through the draft. You can make some trades and do other things. But as an example, so like Jamie Drysdale, let's say this year, because his contract's up soon, let's say this year he has 75 points. Well, he's going to, look at whatever Evan Bouchard gets paid or somebody gets paid when he's up, and he's going to be like, or even just Darnell Nurse, like, hey, he makes 9.5. Look I have more points. Yeah. I play just as many minutes. Like when the Flyers got Drysdale, yes, it's fine that they got him and know that he has upside, but they're going to have to pay him if he does reach his potential with the Flyers. And that could even be an issue.
Right. And he's in the second year of a 3-year deal. Right. So I think next summer is prime to start the conversation about an extension for him. Again, to your point, assuming that he's healthy this season, he produces this season, he's effective on the power play, all of those things that were expected of him when he was the guy they went after in, the deal with Cutter Gauthier. So
because they're paying, like, here's the economics of this. They are going to, if Drysdale works out, they're going to have to pay him his big contract before they would have had to pay Cutter Gauthier his big contract.
Yep.
They sped up that part of the thing, and sometimes that's not good.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see, because I think in many ways, this is a contract year for Jamie Drysdale.
It is.
Even though he has one more year left on his deal. For that exact point is that the Flyers,
they'll decide by after this year, do we want to continue on with him, or are we gonna, what are we going to do with him?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that is the sticking point, and all of this is going to have to come into play when we're looking at other contract extensions down the road, and eventually what they're going to end up paying Michkov, again, assuming everything goes well with him, as we expect it to, for sure. But I think that there's going to come a point where it's all going to come to a head.
Yeah, and this is why, like, what happens in the Johansson deal is important. This is why Ristolainen being able to play or doing something is important, because he's making a lot of money. Same with Couturier. Like, this is where these contracts that maybe players can't reach anymore as far as what they can produce, it hurts you on the cap.
Right. And I think the other contract that's going to be really interesting related to this is the Cam York contract.
Yeah.
Because I think that, he is an RFA after this upcoming season, but his salary is going to go up. Too. And it's, are they going to go bridge deal? Are they going to go longer term?
I mean, even if they go bridge deal, it's going to be $6.5, $7 million, maybe $7.5.
It's going to be Sanheim-esque in terms of the contract, right?
It is. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I think that it's going to be now, at that point, the Ryan Ellis LTIR will hopefully run out, but
you got these other ones, and that's
for another
why,
2 more years. But
yeah, that's why you always have to be careful. Like, I'm not saying Anaheim knew what they were doing, but they looked ahead and decided, hey, we can't, like, we're getting Gauthier now. We can't have all of these contracts, so we might as well put Drysdale in this deal. And maybe the Flyers asked for him, but either way, they weren't going to be able to pay Drysdale. Like, they knew that. And if you look at the rest of a lot of their young core, is just that's it. It's a young core. So they're not going to make that kind of money for a while.
Yeah, all very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I want to touch real quickly on the Seth Jarvis deal in Carolina because it's very interestingly structured. That there's some deferred salary after the contract expires, like literally the day after the contract expires.
Right.
There's a payout so that it in effect lowers the cap hit $400,000 per year for the duration of the contract, which is kosher according to the CBA. But do you think this will happen more and more as we approach a potential lockout, as we talked about on last Friday's show?
Oh, yeah. Now I think every team's going to do it. And whether it's in the next CBA or not, we'll see. So we don't have long to wait for that. But I think a lot of teams are going to do it. But like the reason Tom Dunning can do it is because he really is flush with cash. He's very, very rich. So he doesn't care. A corporation like Comcast, while they have plenty of money, they may draw the line there. They may be like, how many of these, or do we want any of these? Because we're already paying like bonus overages. Do we want to start doing this too? Because that comes out of their profit.
It does.
So that's, sometimes corporations might not want to do that.
Yeah, it is a very different situation with the Flyers for sure.
Yes.
All right. As promised, we are going to talk about Danny Briere and his comments about Jelt Luchanko and expectations there. We're going to do that coming up next. Some of the best concerts of the year take place in the late summer leading into the fall. It's my favorite time to head to a show. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for those live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite part of the Game Time app is that it's great for getting notified about those last-minute super deals, so you know you're getting the best bang for your buck. Best of all, they have all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout when you activate that feature. Also, the tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Download Game Time, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. You can find me there each and every Friday. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, Danny Briere kind of stepped in it a little bit here, probably, inadvertently for sure, but he did an interview with La Presse, a French language publication in Quebec, where he was talking about the thought process of drafting Jelt Luchanko and the trade down and all of that. And I think because it's a Montreal, French language publication, he compared Luchanko to Nick Suzuki, which I think, it's possible to do that. Like, I don't think it's a terrible comparison, but, just trying to compare him to a local athlete, for a frame of reference here. He said, though, that if he's half as good as Nick Suzuki, he'll be satisfied, which is where he stepped into it, right?
Yeah, you can't say that, because for what was taken after the Flyers, Zhibuyem, Konstantinius, if Konstantinius is number one center and Jelt Luchanko is a number two center, or if Zhibuyem is a number one or number two defenseman and Jelt Luchanko is a number two center, they partially failed. Like, that's a failure. And so he probably wasn't thinking about that when he said it. But the thing is this, like I said, it's very early in Luchanko's development. I don't see the same skill level as Nick Suzuki. I don't. So I understand why he said half, right? So now it's like, well, if we parse it out, and look, I think Suzuki could be playing with better players too. Like the Canadians players with Slavkovsky and what's coming, they could get a whole lot better. So he may, have better players to play with soon. So I look at it and I say, okay, let's just take the leap that Luchanko is the number one center. Is he going to be a top 10 number one center? I don't think so. I feel pretty confident about saying that. Doesn't mean he won't be one, no. But that's where you got to watch what you're saying here, only because it's like he can't be half of Nick Suzuki. If he is, that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's where, you know, he's still learning how to do this job in a lot of ways, because I think if you take it just as a general, like, colloquial expression, what he's saying is that, yeah, I know Jelt Luchanko isn't Nick Suzuki, but he's going to be pretty close and like almost as good as Nick Suzuki. And this is where, like,
then say that.
Right. And that's the thing, is like, he chose poorly with his words about saying half as good, because then, of course, like, any logical person would go to the internet, look at Nick Suzuki's stats, cut them in half, and say, that's not even good enough to be a third line center. You know? And so I get that, you know, the intention of the statement probably wasn't malicious, and it wasn't to say that Jelt Luchanko is literally going to be half as good as Nick Suzuki.
Well, at least he set the bar low. He didn't put a lot of pressure on Luchanko. We'll give him that.
Right. Right. And I think, you know, he was trying to pump up Nick Suzuki more than he was trying to cut down.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I do. I think there's something to that. But this is where, like, you have to be careful as a GM, especially with player evaluations. We've talked about it before. You've got to be pretty specific with stuff, especially with all people out there like me and even just fans that are looking at other data all the time now. It's a different world. So you have to really be careful with that. It's not like, you know, when he was playing, you could say that and be like, yeah, okay, nobody's going to really get crazy about it. But now everybody gets crazy about it. There's 10,000 podcasts out there.
Yeah. And I do think that, again, this is just a flub of a statement on his part, but it was in an interview for a publication. It's not, and
it's just a big time publication. No.
Yeah. And it's not just him talking off the cuff. And that's just something he clearly needs to learn a little bit more about. And in the end, I don't think this is a big deal. I think it's just thing at a weird time of the year that people are going to notice it a lot more. Right.
Oh, they notice it in Montreal, though. Don't worry.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying notice it in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it hasn't hit really yet, but no, unfortunately, it's going to. With this show and probably a few others that just picked up on it. But the point is, just like you tell a player, hey, you know, like John would say to a player, you got to clean up. He's got to clean up his game a little bit. Danny's got to clean up the message a little bit, like he just has to. It's not to say he can't have fun with it, but he has to say it the way you said it. He can't say it that way.
Yeah, and just say there's a comparison between Luchanko's game and Nick Suzuki's game, and, you know, maybe to appease Canadiens fans, he wants to say that Nick Suzuki's better.
They could say, listen, we like the pick. Fine. We're confident. We're confident we took Luchanko where he is. We really like where he is. Yeah, maybe someday he can get close to Suzuki. And that's, you know, that's fine, because then you've justified your pick, why you made the pick, whatever. I mean, if we took him at face value, we'd be like, why did you pick this guy?
Yeah. That is absolutely true.
I mean, it's just legitimate. So obviously that's why we're not taking it at face value like that.
Yeah, and I think to your point about Bouillon and Hellenius, like, there's going to be a lot of eyes in Philadelphia on those two in terms of how they do. And I think that, you know, a lot of questions were asked of the Flyers and Briere why they didn't pick either one of those two. I mean, even like we thought that one of those two could, if they
a lot of people thought it, and a lot of people said it after on TV. It wasn't just us, on Twitter and a lot of places. But we have to remind people, like, I think I have this right, like when Donovan McNabb was drafted, I think Eagles fans wanted Ricky Williams. They didn't get Ricky Williams, so they booed the McNabb draft pick, right? And that turned out pretty good.
Yeah, that I cannot speak to, but
I'm pretty sure that's the way it worked out.
I do think that, you know, we've definitely seen that in the past where draft picks have gotten booed, and either the pick got their revenge and became beloved in the city, or they didn't. But I don't think Jelt Luchanko was booed, and I don't think anybody has anything but the best of hopes, wishes, and dreams for Jelt Luchanko.
Some Blackhawks fans right in front of me booed the fact that we said, hey, they're going to pick Patrick Kane, and there were a lot of boos. And so, I mean, that stuff happens.
So we'll see how Luchanko pans out. We'll see if Briere walks back the statement a little bit, or like what I meant to say was, which I might recommend that he do that. Anyway, y'all out there have some excellent mailbag questions
Really good.
related to some of our previous episodes, like the CBA and on some waivers exempt players as well. So we're going to get into all of that coming up next. Diving into our mailbag, Olson Math, who we've answered questions from before, always has really good and interesting comments over on the YouTube channel. Specifically picked out a comment that said they need to get rid of the NCAA players' ability to become a UFA when they finish their college career because it undermines the purpose of the draft. We had to trade Gauthier because if we didn't, he could just wait it out and become UFA. I don't like it when players like Adam Fox get to just leave for a team they want and the team that drafted them gets nothing. So what do you think about changing those rules?
I've spoken to a lot of people about it over the years, and I've always been told there is no appetite to do that. So I don't expect
on either side.
On either side. So I just don't expect it to happen. I understand the thought process behind it, but there's also let's not forget, teams could stash players in college and not have to sign them in their second year.
Yeah. I mean, there's pros and cons to this.
That's the positive for the GM. They may get stung once in a while, but that's a big deal. Like I always used to say on like Hockey Prospect Radio, they stash guys in Europe, they stash guys in college because they don't have to come to a contract agreement quickly with them. That saves them. That's why in a lot of drafts, 5th round, 6th round, 7th round, you see a lot of college players and you see a lot of Euros.
Yeah. And you see, a lot of the free agents that are signed out of college, like not many of them become big superstars.
Right. There's a lot of good players for sure. Mm-hmm. And the superstar levels, like that's a whole different thing. I wouldn't even use superstars. I'd just say, were they all stars? And I'd say, yeah, we've seen, I'd say 3 to 5 in the last 6-7 years, just off the top of my head. I could name a few. But yeah, it's not the norm.
Right. And so like my take on it is that the guys, like there aren't a lot of guys that hold out who are star players who are going to just hold out to go where they want to go.
Right.
The guys that, get their UFA status, the team just doesn't want them. And they took the time and decided not to sign them. I mean, we saw that with Bryce Brodzinski, right?
Right. And the negative for the player is
him. He wound up with an AHL deal, not even a 2-way contract.
Right. Like most of the time, the negative for the player is they don't want to wait the 4 years in college. They'll go and graduate, over summers, but they have to wait to become a UFA. So that's not the easiest process for them, So that's the answer there. And then you have a guy like Snuggerud that wants to keep going back to college. You have to let him. Like he's in charge. So sometimes you have that too, where he's like, no, I want to see this through. Okay. We just hope you want to come
especially when guys
after.
Make it to the Frozen Four and maybe they lose in the final and they want to go back and give it another shot.
Right.
So yeah, I think the players like it and the owners.
Both sides like it for different reasons.
Yeah. But I mean, I get it that as a fan, you're like, but we have this guy and we don't, and it is upsetting. So I do understand it, but there's a reason for it on both sides. Another comment from Robert Kirchner on CHL versus college players. He feels that major junior players should be able to play NCAA hockey. The reason for the NCAA is, in terms of the players getting paid in junior hockey, which they kind of do and kind of don't.
Yeah,
it's like
get a stipend. Yeah.
So, but it's still technically money, I guess, which now college players can get through likeness sales and all of that. But that's neither here nor there.
For hockey, it hasn't really taken off big yet, like in other sports.
Right. So, it feels like there's a rift in terms of income and money. And so, but the development in the NCAA is getting better and better. So should CHL players be able to jump ship and go to college?
Yeah. And I think that's going to happen. There's a lawsuit out there now. We'll see if if that happens from that lawsuit. It very well could. So I'm in full agreement with Robert. I think it should happen.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there needs to be more flexibility, and as the college route gets more and more,
you can't like tell a guy just because he played like 2 games in, you know, in the somewhere in the Canadian Hockey League that now you're ineligible. Like, you can't do that. It's just not right.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think there needs to be some flexibility. Now, the weirdest thing would be a college player going to junior hockey. That feels wrong to me.
No, that's true. But there's some cases in this lawsuit, like of a European player playing overseas, getting paid there, and still being able to go to college after. That's the basis. There's part of that's in the lawsuit. So that's gray area, as we like to say.
Yeah, I'm very curious how this lawsuit is going to turn out and how much it changes things. Andrew has a really good question about waiver eligible players, and especially in context of the Flyers. Of the waiver eligible players who have to fight to make the team, that's Ronnie Attard, Bobby Brink, Adam Ginning. Do you think any of them get claimed by another team? And Ginning is still waivers exempt because he'll be 25 at the end of.
So he's out of the conversation.
He's out of the conversation. But I would add Ollie Licksell to that conversation.
Yes.
Because he's waivers eligible.
He's entered the chat.
Yes, he has. And of course, anyone on an ELC is exempt. Massimo Rizzo is exempt right now. So it's Brink, I don't think is getting sent down at this point.
No, I think they're going to see him through up at the NHL level the entire season, see what he can do.
Right. So it's really like Attard at this point that is the Igor Zamula of this season.
Right. Well, yeah, and hopefully they don't feel like they're so flush they can risk it. But there is a thing where if you wait for the right day just before the season starts, when everybody's trying to get their rosters right, it's hard to claim somebody, and the Flyers may wait for that day. They know when that is. Yeah. All the cap guys know.
Yeah, when everybody goes through waivers all at once, and you hope your guy gets lost in the shuffle.
Correct.
Doesn't get picked up.
So they may wait for that day, and that's probably what will happen.
It's right before the final rosters are due. It's like the last day to do waivers before the final rosters are due. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't see them putting Attard on the main roster just to hold on to him.
No, I don't think
the way they did with Zamula, because I don't think they see him in the same way that they see Zamula. Right. Now, we saw Zamula have a fantastic developmental year at the NHL level, and he can do it. But I just don't see them giving Attard that same opportunity, even though it kind of would make sense to do so. I just don't know that there's room for his style.
There's not room. Play. If they didn't bring Eric Johnson back, there would have been room, but that's another story for another day.
Yep, because that's like your 7th defenseman there. So there just isn't a spot unless they go with 8D and have one less forward, which
you can't do for long. He did it more than most, but you can't do it for long.
The only question here is if they have to hold this roster spot for Ryan Johansson, right? And so there is one less forward.
Right. That's a whole other
thing. So there's a lot of machinations that would have to happen for them to hold on to Attard, just to hold on to him. But Licksell, maybe somebody would pick him up.
I would if I were
if he gets a call up and then gets sent back down.
Yeah, if I were a team like San Jose or somebody, I'd claim him.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. All right, our last question comes from Dennis, and we were talking about the broadcast schedule, the national broadcast schedule, and all the hoops you have to jump through with the different streaming services. So Dennis says, I don't think it's fair that a full season Flyers ticket holder doesn't have the ability to see all the games. We should be given an access code for games on pay stations.
I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, honestly, the only way you could really execute this is the Flyers would have to basically pay for that fan subscription. And so maybe with a certain ticket plan, they'd be willing to do that. Like season tickets, one thing, but if you're like season tickets, but you got your seats down low, or season tickets, you're up in club area or something, maybe you throw that in as a perk. I could see that because it's going to cost the Flyers. They're not going to be able to give it to you for free.
Right. And I think, I don't know logistically how it would work in terms of, do they get them the subscription through the service, or do they reduce the price of their season ticket by the
Yeah, it's
cost
one
of
way or
the
the other.
subscription?
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be an interesting perk to add for
Yeah.
sure. And I think somebody might upgrade their ticket, if
Yeah.
they're getting their 41 home games plus some preseason and
Yep.
hopefully the playoffs coming up soon. Should you get your $20 a month or whatever it is to pay for ESPN Plus? Sure.
Yeah.
I think it would be a really smart business move.
See,
on
now if
their
Comcast
part.
did the pay part, like if they were ESPN and they own the Flyers, then that would be easy. But they don't, it's
Right.
not that way.
Right. Or do they get like a special discount on a Comcast cable subscription
Maybe.
to get it that way? I don't know. It's a very interesting idea.
It is.
Dennis,
Makes you
maybe you
think.
should ask the team, see what they say.
Yeah.
All right. That will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Our next show will cover the rookie showcase where Russ is attending. So we'll get all the word from Michkov and Fedotov there. Plus, we'll have your poll results on the perception of the Flyers at the national level. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. If you've got those mailbag questions like we just talked about, you can let us know on Twitter at LockedOnFlyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise from a local perspective. You can find the link in the show notes, so you don't even have to search. Locked On NHL is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.